in the vein of what I just said about the number of doctorates being offered in the US, being a scientist is not for everyone. Alrighty, so this was sent to me by a viewer, actually from Science, and there's an interesting report that underlays it. U.S. science no longer leads the world. Here's how top advisors say the nation should respond. And this comes to us from Science, which, as we all know, can be quasi-woke, so I wanted to bring this up. But in this case, they don't actually do a terrible job. They do a half-decent job with this here, and and we should get into that, actually, a little bit. And I'm going to show some of the report itself, too, and we're going to try and do this all in less than half an hour, so we'll see how far we get. A new data-rich report by the National Science Foundation confirms China has overtaken the United States as the world's leader in several key scientific metrics, including the overall number of papers published and patents awarded. U.S. scientists also have serious competition from foreign researchers in certain fields, it finds. The loss of hegemony raises an important question for U.S. policymakers and the country's research community. According to NSF's oversight body, the National Science Board, quote, since across-the-board leadership in science and engineering is no longer a possibility, what then should our goals be? NSB asks in a policy brief that accompanies this year's Science and Engineering Indicators, NSF's biennial assessment of global research, which was released this week. NSF has converted the single gargantuan volume into 9 thematic reports summarized in the State of U.S. Science and Engineering 2022. NSB's white paper hints at an answer by highlighting several factors it considers essential for maintaining a healthy U.S. research environment. The nation, it says, must sustain excellence in basic research, foster a scientific workforce more diverse in race, gender, and geography, and support high-quality pre-college science and math education. The board also calls for forging closer ties between academia and industry, keeping borders open to promote international partnerships and promoting ethical research practices. Achieving those goals won't be easy, says Julia Phillips, an applied physicist who chairs the NSB committee that oversees indicators. Now retired after a long career at AT&T Bell Laboratories and the Department of Energy's Sandia National Laboratories, Phillips spoke with Science Insider about the obstacles posed by an uncertain budget climate and roiling debate over how to protect research from foreign influence. There's a lot of interesting things in here that we can get into, and I want to point out a few things, actually, with this before I get into the actual report itself. The first is actually the spending thing. Many of you who followed this channel long enough know that I am myself a politically lean more conservative than liberal. And so spending on stuff is generally not something I favor, is just broad out spending on every dang little thing. It's not usually something I favor. But here's what I would have to say with that. Here's the thing about it that makes it interesting in this case. It would be, quote, it would be the height of hubris to think that the United States would lead in everything. Maybe so, but we should have the attitude that we can be the best at everything, would be my kind of goal there. You really should try to be the absolute best that you can possibly be at every dang little thing. So I think at least that's my belief anyway. So I think the most important thing is for the United States to decide where it cannot be number 2. At the top of her priorities is sustaining the federal government's financial support of fundamental science. So for those of you who don't necessarily know, some of you on my channel probably heard me following my channel for a while, have probably heard me mention this before. Fundamental science, or basic research as it's often called also, is basically research that's all about the breakthroughs. That's all about making fundamental new discoveries, changing things, making things amazing, all that kind of good jazz. And what is the other type of science that there is typically referred to as applied research or applied science, where you're worried more so about how things connect with each other and how things connect with society. That's where I tend to focus a little bit more myself, is on applied stuff, though I do fundamentals with respect to modeling, climate modeling related work. So there is that, and that is a distinct difference, because where you're going to get your serious breakthroughs and your next new technology is going to be with the fundamental science Not necessarily the applied science, so it certainly can come from there because applied science research can spark things in fundamental science. So it's important to think on that. Let's see. If we lead in basic research, then we're in a really good position, she says. But the government's record over the last decades does not give me a cause for hope. For example, Phillips says she's not optimistic that Congress will approve pending legislation that envisions a much larger National Science Foundation over the next 5 years, or a 2022 appropriations bill that would give NSF a lot more money right away. The National Sciences Foundation does fund a tremendous amount of research. Actually, in the United States, colloquially in academia, it's referred to as if you can get an NSF grant, you can get funding to do anything, and you're pretty much set. After there, once you get in the door with one NSF grant, you can get more and more and more. That's typically the sort of unwritten rule that I recall many times over hearing in grad school: is if you can get money from NSF, you're set. I don't know how true that is anymore, but that has been the old colloquial saying. Let's see. How much is the U.S. willing to spend on basic research, she asks. Right now, it's a really small fraction of gross domestic product. Increasing that could be on the table, and I appreciate that Congress has consistently been more generous than what presidents have requested, but I see no evidence that there's an appetite for raising that share significantly, and which is what it would take. Yes. So I think, if I recall correctly, in the actual report here, which is over here, actually, this is not the section I want, but of course, all of this will be linked in the description for you here. So I think, yes, proportion of total U.S. research and development funded by the U.S. government decreased from 31% in 2010 to 21% in 2019, even as the amount of federally funded R&D increased. And the reason it's even as the amount of federally funded R&D increased is because we just keep borrowing money and to pay the bills. Now, like I said, you all know that I'm pretty much a constitutional conservative, and there's one thing I want to point out, which is why it doesn't bother me to spend money on science and to try and spend more money on scientific research, not just because I am a scientist, but because this is Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution, which details the Congress's power to spend and the power of the purse, essentially. And actually, one of the things written right in here is that Congress is to spend money to promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries. Now, I'm sure there's a whole lots of debates there over what exactly that line meant amongst constitutional scholars, but the Constitution doesn't say which science, of course, because you don't have anywhere near as many disciplines today as you did back then. I'm sorry, anywhere near as many disciplines now. You don't have anywhere near as many disciplines back then as you did today. There we go. That's what I was trying to say. But you end up with this beautiful take right here of these things here, and you can end up with great funding of science from Congress. So that is supposed to happen, that to a degree that they are supposed to do things to promote the progress of science in the old language here, scientific research. So that's actually in the Constitution. You fund science effectively. Though, again, what exactly is meant by the progress of science, funding the progress of science, that is an argumentation we can have in legal circles, in constitutional scholarship circles. I am not the one to have that argument. Distrust on research security. Phillips thinks the lack of trust between academic leaders and U.S. intelligence is aggravating tensions over the potential threat posed by foreign students and scientists who study work at U.S. universities. Members of Congress and federal security agencies have accused China of building up its research capacity by enticing U.S.-based scientists to share their discoveries. Some have blamed U.S. university administrators for lax enforcement of rules that require researchers to disclose foreign funding and are calling for tighter oversight. Universities have pushed back, saying law enforcement officials often withhold information about potential threats on their campuses, and that government's 3-year-old China initiative has engaged in unfair racial profiling of researchers of Chinese descent. Yeah, that is a thing here. I mean, you need to have a certain amount of trust between Fed and universities, too, with these things. And as much as universities get money from the Fed, and there's a lot of things they're doing in collaboration right now, particularly on the equity side of things and the DEI side of things, they don't necessarily trust the Fed all that much. And the Fed doesn't necessarily return the favor and tell them. But that's a whole other thing. The latest indicators highlight serious and persistent inequities. So, this is the appalling state of science education. Serious and persistent inequities in elementary and secondary school education, such as poor students of color scoring lower than white and Asian students on standardized tests, being more likely to have inexperienced science and math teachers. Those disparities emphasize the need for NSF to continue supporting efforts to improve science teaching, Phillips says. But she concedes the federal government has limited ability to shape pre-college schooling. Quote, the levers of decision-making are mainly at local and state levels, she says. However, NSF has funded a lot of research on what works in the kindergarten through 12th grade curriculum, so there is potential for some impact. She adds, quote, there is an area in which the National Science Board is speaking more in its role as an advisor and calling attention to this problem. And in my opinion, if we do nothing more than get national attention on what I think is just an appalling situation, we have done our job. Now, she is not incorrect that education in K through 12 schools is abysmal right now. And there is distinct gaps. I'm not going to lie on that one. There is distinct gaps, and this comes from the National Assessment of Educational Progress here, and the gaps between students and what have you with poverty, and even more so with that. I do wonder about an awful lot of things going on here, and I'm glad that I'm actually very glad with this, because I was expecting to see a whole bunch of, when I first saw this article pop up, I was expecting to see a whole bunch of woke speak about how this is the result of systemic racism or something along that line. But they haven't done that here. And they actually didn't do that in the report either. So this is the section that actually has this in it. And I'm going to encourage you to go read this, because there's no way I can make it through all of this report in one video. I encourage you to go have a look at this, because this has got some great information in it. So this is average scores of 15-year-olds on the mathematics and science literacy scales from the OECD education system. So basically, how well do students do? So, but these scores are kind of aggravating. I kind of prefer the report card and the percentage of students who reach proficiency and what have you. And as I said, in the United States, the 2019 National Assessment of Educational Progress, that nation's report card basically said for 2014, what was it? It was 24 or 22% of grade 12 students were proficient in science. Help with respect to the future of science. Oh my gosh, help. Let's see. There's, of course, all of these, which have to do with, this is the average scores associated with the National Assessment for the Educational Progress by the different racial demographics that they have in here. And, I want to point out one thing here. There's one thing that has bugged me consistently about these graphics, because humans are very variable. And what do I mean by that? Humans can be wildly different in their performance and different things on different aspects of life and what have you, and how they do on tests and things like that. So I noticed one thing that I never see on these is error bars. Do you ever notice that? You never see error bars in here. I would actually really want to see that, because I want to know if a lot of these are statistically significant differences that you see going on over time. So like, what's the error bars on all of these dots? But they never show that. If I could get my hands on the data, I would actually do that calculation myself and figure out what the error bars are, but they don't actually ever show that. So I'm just like, I want more. I want more. Demand to see the confidence intervals around these means, because this is from a whole bunch of students that take this, and they make an estimate of what the mean, they take the average of that to effectively say this is the mean of all students, but really they're taking the mean of the sample. So you're supposed to have a standard error there to give you a sense of what kind of error there is on what your sample thinks is the mean of all students of a particular demographic. And those kinds of things from statistical practice you can use to then make some inference about whether or not this is statistically significant differences that you're seeing. But they don't have any of these error bars here, so it's kind of hard to tell. Anyway, not knocking it. There are real disparities there. I'm seeing that in the data, but I am asking, what is the variability around the average here? That's what I'm not seeing. Public middle school and high school mathematics teachers and science teachers with 3 years or less of teaching experience by selected school characteristic 2017 to 2018. Okay, minority enrollment. Okay, that's interesting bunch of things here where we're sending newer teachers. So these are all teachers with 3 years or less of experience. Where do they end up when they get started? S&E in higher education. Again, these are great disparities, but I actually read this through this section pretty closely through, and I was really pleased to see that they literally just talk about these are the gaps that we see here. And, it's not necessarily great. We want to see all students do well, but considering that, like, as the California proposed mathematics curriculum would say, they want you to focus on social justice instead of teaching math content and get rid of advanced placement and stop challenging students and, go with the validation of emotions and social emotional learning and all that. That's not going to help improve any of this and get more students into science and engineering programs, either in K through 12, and get on that track, or major in that in college. So international students. Oh, yes. So Americans' perceptions about scientists. This is in here too. This didn't get talked about in the Science article about this report, but again, this is something you can go look at. Confidence in scientists to act in the best interest of the Republic by education level of respondents in 2020. So, like high school diploma or less, it's 30% say, a great deal. They have a great deal of confidence. But if you go to the postgraduate degree, it's 50% or more in here that say they have a great deal of confidence. And it's 92% if you take the two columns together, a fair amount and a great deal. I tend to fall somewhere in the middle at this point because of some of the experiences that I've had with academia in late, but that's academia. So I have a lot of confidence in scientists. Most scientists do their things right, but they're not immune to some of the other things going on here. But this is a great section to read through, and I was, again, really pleased, actually, to see that it wasn't as woke as I thought. And there's a lot of good stuff in here about this is what happened, this is what we saw, and it's going to be up to others to do that. I tend to think there's lots of challenges in terms of socioeconomic status and class, also with other issues surrounding the degrading quality, the decline of quality in K through 12 education that started really in the 1980s, I think. And the reason we learned this is going to be something I may put back to Deb Fellman to ask her question, but I believe she would say something similarly, that the K through 12 education in the United States really started declining in the 1980s following the inclusion of more and more social justice related stuff, even back then, as it was coming out with education schools and teaching and what have you. Funny enough, I think I might dispute this statement, because NSF does fund some serious social sciences studies, and they may have funded some education studies. I'm not 100% sure, but I don't know that they've actually got it all figured out. And I may go dive into some more education stuff and see what NSF has funded with education studies and see if they're good or if they're lousy in here. But I'm not 100% sure. I agree with the assessment that they've made here. So, spreading the wealth. NSF has spent decades tinkering with the grant-making process that results in most of its dollars going to a relative handful of institutions among the nation's east and west coast. For example, its 40-year-old established program to stimulate competitive research tries to build research capacity at institutions elsewhere and now serves half the states. This year, NSF has asked Congress to fund a network of geographically distributed innovation hubs to boost the research infrastructure available to scientists in have-not states. And the Senate has approved a bill that would funnel 20% of NSF's overall research budget to institutions in those states. But even NSF seeks a way to create a larger pool of grantees. Phillips says the agency has wrestled with how to measure the effectiveness of such efforts. If you're going to pour money at a problem, you also want to know if it's having an impact, she says. One possibility is to see how patenting activity has changed in different parts of the country, she continues, and how much of that can you trace back to an innovation hub. Another metric could be how the number of science and engineering jobs has increased in a particular region, or the flow of talent between academia and the private sector. You see that flow at all the Silicon Valley and all the time in Silicon Valley and in the Route 128 area surrounding Boston, but you don't necessarily see it happening in other areas of the country. So this is a map that they have here. The United States, U.S. states, in the National Science Foundation's established program to stimulate competitive research, in gray, had few colleges listed in the top 100 R&D spending in 2019, the dots. So there's a few dots in here. I don't think this is an interactive graphic. Yeah, no, this isn't an interactive graphic. There is one thing I want to point out. It's really, really good, as a finishing with this, it's really, really good to have lots of science and engineering jobs and things like that. I'm not knocking it. I want to see more folks who, if they have the talent, the ability, the passion to do it, go for it. I'm game for it. And you know what? I'll help you out with the education side as much as I can. But what concerns me, if I can find it, is the number of doctorates that have graduated. Here we go. This is where I get concerned because they're going to run into a problem in the United States that I don't think is very sustainable. It may be sustainable in other countries. That depends upon their budgets, but I have been concerned about this, and I noticed this for a while. So if you think about this, these are doctorates that we are graduating. These are science and engineering doctorate degrees. These are PhDs in sciences, and this includes social sciences and social sciences and physical sciences. There we go. My brain finally started working. Here. So the concern I have actually is very much from right here, where you have 2000, the United States awarded 26,086 doctorate degrees, which is a lot actually. But look at how much more was awarded here. In 2018, we awarded in the U.S. 41,071 doctorate degrees. And of course, all of these folks are probably still, a lot of these folks, depending on how many of them dropped out, because having a PhD is not easy necessarily. You are competing for grant dollars most of the time. And I may do a little bit on this just to show some of the issues and the challenges with funding in science, because after the March for Science was started, there was a study done that surveyed the participants as well as the scientists who were, the participants who were not scientists and the participants who were, and asked, why are you here as part of it? Why are you here in the March for Science? And this was in 2017. And what they found in that study is that 91% of the scientists who were polled and who were there and surveyed and were part of that March for Science, and they supported it because they were afraid they were going to lose funding. I want to go back and find the study because it would be great to talk about on this channel. But there's the thing there is that so much of current U.S. academic work, did I say that? Academic work with science and engineering, the research enterprise is really tied up a lot at universities, and a lot of universities depend, and professors in their different labs do depend, on getting money most of the time from the federal government in terms of taxpayer grants. There's different agencies that put out calls for proposals, and you end up getting grants after a grants proposals competition. So the concern with this is there's an increasing number of doctorates being graduated every year. All of them are entering that pool for competing for what is mostly paid for by federal grant dollars at this point, with the exception of some foundations and some private funding. And of course, there's some state dollars also that goes into that. But the vast majority that I know of in terms of grants is for research is paid for in federal dollars, unless you work for a private company that takes portions of its customer sales to do research. And there's research and development like that too. But in terms of the fundamentals kind of stuff, it tends to happen more paid for in the US by the federal government. But you're going to have more and more doctorates coming out that are going to be competing for those dollars. So it's not sustainable is what my concern is. I'm not 100% sure how sustainable it is in the future when you have this many people trying to compete for grant dollars to pay for their research and what have you. And a lot of it is good research, and there's a lot of good students who are doing good research, but this is a concern that I have. But overall, on the education piece, I am particularly appalled by the bad state of science education, and it doesn't help when there's been a lot of the social justice related stuff that's come in, and content has been slowed down and being taught a lot in the last few years. And that one I can send you over to the Reason We Learn for knowing that. But that's the comment I want to say there. Get back to teaching content in science and teaching rigorous science, and not, and in the vein of what I just said about the number of doctorates being offered in the U.S., being a scientist is not for everyone. Truthfully, it is. It is not for everyone to do. And you may find that that's not your telos. You may find that that's not your passion. Totally okay. Totally okay. There's nothing wrong with that. You may very well find yourself doing something else at some point. That's okay too. But that's it. What I wanted to say on this. It's a really interesting read here, actually, and I think you should go read it myself, actually, if you get the time. All right, that's it for now. If you like this video, hit the like button on the way out the door, share the video, subscribe to the channel, comment on the video. Let me know your thoughts. What do you think on this kind of thing, that we no longer lead the world here? And education is a big part of it. We need much better education in K through 12 and higher education as it relates to science and philosophical practices of science and the whole good works there. We do need a lot of that. Don't forget, also, you can come on over and join us over on Locals. Here, we will be doing some special things, of course, after the Thursday review airs on YouTube. There's a live chat just for Locals supporters. You can come over there along with Philosophical Friday. I'm going to be adding more things as we go along this year. That's it for now. Until next time, I'm Adrian. I hope you stay curious, my friends.